Hello, Dark Reader. Welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. I've had a few moments of enlightenment this week when it comes to book reading. So, because if you're an avid book reader like I am, there's some things that I think we need to consider. So, if you cannot remember the book you read a year later, the characters, the plot, the world, all of that stuff, and it was just very in the middle of the road, would you consider that a good book? I have to really think about that because, I might initially think, oh, okay, this was a decent read. Oh yeah, I feel okay. But overall, I feel really limited in the books that I remember, things that really stuck in my mind. I can really honestly, just from this past year, so it's almost been a half a year now, I might have like a handful of books that I can list off again. So I think those are questions to kind of consider. Not only that, I had a friend who read For the Wolf, and I read it too. We just randomly talked about it. And she mentioned it's funny how we read the same book, but we read different books. So that's just a little piece of wisdom that every book is going to hit us differently. We're going to feel things a little differently. Some things are going to be to our taste, and sometimes they're really not. So I thought it was a really cool insight to have and something to kind of keep in mind. When I do these book reviews, I'm not knocking anybody for reading any of these books at all. Different strokes for different folks, for sure. And I know that I can be a little critical. So that kind of leads me to this book. Now, we're going to be talking about Holly Black's adult fantasy debut novel, Book of Night. This has been posted everywhere. And the only reason why I begin this way is because this did not work for me. And I was just floored. And sometimes I think, I don't know about you, but maybe I'm just not into the bestsellers. I just don't ever feel connected to a lot of those hyped up books. Or maybe it's because there's so much pressure for it to do really well that when it isn't hitting all of those marks, you immediately think it's not a good book. So I'm not sure. I'm still navigating all of these things. Not to say that I didn't enjoy this book. I enjoyed it, but it was a middle of the road book for me. So I'm going to talk about that a little later, but first I'm going to talk about Holly Black briefly and share the summary with you because the summary is a big sell. It was a huge sell for me. First, let's talk about Holly Black. For those of you that don't know who Holly Black is, she is a best-selling author. Like, she's done over 30 fantasy novels. She primarily has written kids books and YA books. She's been a finalist for Eisner Award. She lives in New England with her husband and her son. And she has had film adaptations for her book series. So, for instance, the Spiderwick Chronicles were adopted into film. I haven't read them before, but I've definitely heard of them. They're very well known. She's done a lot of stuff, including comics. She even did parts of Lucifer in the comic industry, so that's really cool. So she's been everywhere. She's done a lot of stuff. But like I said before, Book of Night is her first adult fantasy novel. So what is Book of Night? Let's go over that first. This book is about a woman named Charlie Hall. She's a thief. She has never found a lock she could not pick, a book she couldn't steal, or a bad decision she wouldn't make. She spent half her life working for glow mists, magicians who manipulate shadows to peer into locked rooms, strangle people in their beds, or even worse. Glow mists guard their secrets greedily, creating an underground economy of grimoires. And to rob their fellow magicians, they need Charlie Hall. Now, she's trying to distance herself from past mistakes, but getting out isn't easy. She bartends at this dive, and she's still entirely too close to the corrupt underbelly of the Berkshires. Not to mention that her sister Posey is desperate for magic, and that Charlie's shadowless and possibly soulless boyfriend has been hiding things from her. When a terrible figure from her past returns, Charlie descends into a maelstrom of murder and lies. Determined to survive, she's up against a cast of doppelgangers, mercurial billionaires, glow-mists, and the people she loves best in the world, all trying to steal a secret that will give them vast and terrible power. End summary. It sounds incredibly tempting, right? I'm going to issue a bit of a trigger warning and a potential spoiler warning. This book is very dark, so Holly Black does a great job dealing with parts of trauma and kind of how it manifests in a lot of different ways. So that includes gun violence in this book, there's suicide, drug abuse, there's some sexual scenes, but not in a violent way, but for those of you that might not be comfortable with that, yeah, there's a lot going on in this book. And I'm going to do my best not to spoil the book. There's some surprises that are trickled throughout the entire novel, so I can't really go through the entire novel itself because there's some secrets that are revealed within like page 75. So she unravels the story very slowly. I'm going to tiptoe around all of that, I promise. So let's talk about how I feel about the book. This isn't bad. For me, I think it's just kind of in the middle of the road and it didn't live up to the hype. It does feel a little YA, and I only say this because the relationship that we talk about with Charlie's boyfriend and Charlie, I felt a little nostalgic about because I related to Charlie and her relationship. I was at one time also a huge hot mess, and I was dating at the time my husband, who was very quiet, like kind of mysterious but calm and the opposite of my chaos, and it was a perfect match. So I was like, oh, I know what that feels like. But that's only at the beginning. The relationship develops over time, and then it's not my favorite. That's one thing. Charlie is a hot mess, so I want to emphasize that because she does a lot of things in the book that really they don't make sense, and maybe this is literally all that Charlie Hall does, is she just makes bad decisions, and that's it. That's what you're supposed to accept. But it was just really hard to understand why. It wasn't a solid foundation for her chaotic character. One thing I was really looking forward to, especially after reading the summary, was the world. I was anticipating such a rich, dark, grisly world, and I felt like it fell short. It was so about Charlie that we kind of gloss over a lot of these things entirely, and maybe I just may have missed it, but I'm just not really sure how everything works, like what this world outside of Charlie looks like. And that was something that I was really looking forward to, the shadow magic. So she does talk about things like certain characters don't have shadows and why they may not have shadows. They might sell their shadows, or they might get their shadows taken for them. The importance of shadows. Some people have really developed shadows. Some people have shadows that are no longer a part of them. Like the shadows are their own entity. So I do like that, but that opens up so many doors. Can you imagine if your shadow somehow manifested into its own entity, what kind of world that would look like? But we're so involved with Charlie and the Book of Night and her thievery, actually, that we are supposed to accept this world as is. It's weird because the magic system itself doesn't feel like it's really complex. It just didn't feel like enough of an explanation. But there's all these little pieces, like the Hierophant, what the Cabal has to do with the glow mists. I mean, there really is a lot going on here. But alternatively, here's what I think might have helped the book a little bit. Oftentimes I found myself thinking I should be reading in first person, and it actually kind of threw me off because it's so about Charlie. And I honestly think it might have helped the book a little bit. We might have been able to, instead of being third person and trying to reach out and have this massive world that we're trying to analyze, it could be a character study. I hope that actually makes sense to you. So for me, when I read first person, I'm always kind of thinking, okay, we're inside the brain of the main character and we're trying to see what the world looks like through her eyes. And that's how the story is actually written, but it's in third person. So it's very much centralized in this one area, but it really shouldn't be because there's this really crazy world that she's built. We don't get a massive explanation for it, at least in my opinion. The beginning of the book started off really fast. I was really fascinated about Charlie's past, why she ended up in the field she's in. I liked just her relationship with her sister and her associates. But then the middle of the book, I got lost. I think I glossed over, and it wasn't that long, but it got really sluggish. And I was just disinterested. I was like, I don't even know what's going on here. Like, Charlie's a hot mess right now, and you would think that that would be a roller coaster ride, but no. Then the book picks up again, and there's a lot of plot twists. There's a lot of things that I did not guess either. I was like, ooh, this is fascinating. I like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff that happens towards the end. So as you approach the end, it starts getting good again. It starts picking up, and it was like, oh, that's exciting. But at the very end, wow, it falls flat. I was very disappointed. It just felt like there was no development and we're just stuck at the beginning. It was weird. I was just shocked that the end ended that way. The villain in the book was so stereotypical and cartoony, and I just couldn't get over it. I actually laughed a few times because it was just so silly and I couldn't take him seriously. I personally want just a little more. I want a villain who's more dynamic. They deserve that. There's a reason why they decided to go all evil. A lot of the characters kind of fell flat. Honestly, I kind of liked Posey, her sister. I think she had a purpose. She had a goal. It never wavered. It was the same the entire time. But a lot of the other characters were just kind of not as memorable to me. I think my biggest gripe with the book is that this ended up being more of like a heist in a mystery novel than it was a dark contemporary fantasy novel. I felt like we were more in a spy movie than exploring the shadow magic. That's probably where a lot of my issues are coming from. I guess overall, I'd probably give this a 3-star. There were things that I did like about the book. Unfortunately, some of those things I like are actually spoilers. I do like the twists at the end. I think she did that really well. Anna incorporated some of that, world building in there as well. I thought it was great. And if there is a sequel, I am not opposed to reading that, hoping that opens up what glow mists and shadow magic and all of that stuff is, because that's really honestly the most exciting part about this book that didn't get as much attention as I wanted it to. If you're familiar with Holly Black's books, there's a couple conflicting reviews. Some people who have read her books really enjoy it. Some people were not a fan. There's a minuscule amount of romance in here, which I think from what I'm reading in her YA novels, there's a lot more. So if you're anticipating like a dark, twisty tale with a romance, this is probably not the book for you. It's not as whimsical and dark as I was anticipating. This is very an urban fantasy, but it's very low fantasy, I would say. This is definitely more like a mystery novel. But if that's something that you thoroughly enjoy, I do recommend giving Holly Black's Book of Night a go. Her writing is beautiful. She does a great job with a lot of the things that Charlie experiences. You do feel like you're experiencing them as well. And I think that's because Holly Black is such a talented writer. Check out Book of Night by Holly Black. Let us know how that goes for you and what your thoughts are. You can do this on all of our socials at Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel. We'd love to see you there and have a conversation. If you like this podcast, make sure to tell all of your friends and rate and review on your favorite listening app. It really helps us out. And if you are interested in any of the books that we talk about, you can visit us at darksideofthelibrary.com. We list all of our show notes there. They are affiliate links, just so you're aware, but that has no bearing on you or your price. It's also a great catalog. If you're ever looking for any creepy dark reads, I always go back there, so it's probably a great resource for you. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Have a creep-tastic week.